Hi, I'm Damon Rascala, and today I'm here to bring you the Practice Makes Perfect video interview series. Today I am joined by Jason Cutrupi, CEO of Atlas Outsourcing. Jason, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Damon.
Jason, could you perhaps, maybe if we can begin by you just giving me a bit of a briefing of what you do, what Atlas does, and I guess why you came to establish the business?
Atlas Outsourcing is obviously an outsource provider that provides paraplanning and virtual assistant services to financial advisory. I was on holiday with my family and I was having some trouble because I was also a licensee prior to this, and I was having trouble finding staff. So I then sort of had a brain bubble and thought maybe do something here. So I come back home, saw one of my staff members and said, "Hey, how about you go overseas to Thailand and build this for us?" And she agreed, and she helped me build having some staff over there. And then I said to her, maybe this has got some legs. How about we look at trying to market this to other advisors? This was in September 2011. And we did that. In Thailand, we got to about 15 people. And in 2013, we decided to sort of move it to the Philippines, where I think that's where we really started to get a lot of traction once we moved over there.
Obviously, the business has been around for quite some time. Over that period, what have you found the biggest challenges to be within the business?
I think the biggest challenges we had were obviously when you're starting something from zero, it's always challenging, but doing it overseas is even more challenging again. However, we just found getting the right people and also getting the right contacts, being number one, having a good accountant and a good lawyer to sort of get through the federal and local authorities what they require.
I guess you mentioned, before sort of security, that becomes a pretty key issue when you're managing client data, particularly in an offshore environment. Well, for that matter, even onshore, we've seen, just recently, issues with Latitude and a number of other, Optus, Medibank. So data security certainly come to the fore over the course of the last 12 months in particular. How seriously do you guys take that? How do you prepare for it? What are the types of processes that you implement to protect client data?
Yeah, and it's our number one concern. You really don't get a second chance if there are breaches. So everything from ISO 27001 accreditation, which sort of says that we're serious about what we're doing on the data security side, through to endpoint coverage on computers to make sure they're all quite secure. We have our own cyber team who monitors everything in the offices as well. Even going back to actually where we're located, which is an A-grade building in the central of Manila in Makati, where security get into the building is also quite stringent. So to give you an example, the Australian consulate actually in the same building that we're in. So we take the process quite seriously right through from where we are, right through to all the cybersecurity side of things.
Sure, and you mentioned the ISO, was it 27001? That certification, for the layperson out there, what does that actually mean, and so what are the processes that sit behind that?
And for the lay response, to make it quite simple, is that really, as sort of said earlier, it just sort of means that you really take the whole thing seriously. You get an independent party assess your processes and programs, and if you get that tick, you then get the ISO accreditation.
Yeah, right. Okay, so it's really like an audit of your
Correct.
security functions. Yeah, and I think you've mentioned previously that you have a zero trust policy. Can you tell me what that means and sort of how you handle that?
Well, really with the zero trust is that it's important that all staff members follow all the same processes. No one gets any leeway. I don't get any leeway. I have to follow all the processes that one of my staff members in the Philippines will also have to abide by as well. So that way we've got consistency right through our whole process. And if anything goes wrong, we can sort of pinpoint it a lot easier.
Yeah. So in effect, it sounds to me like the security of offshore operations is perhaps as stringent, if not more stringent than what we'd see onshore.
I would argue you're probably right. I think, but now with all the current episodes we've had, I think people are becoming more aware of it. We've seen more licensees now approach us and sort of ask us more questions about our cybersecurity side, and they're also putting more stringent overlays in their systems, as well as organisations from 2FAs, two-factor authentication. That's just par for the course these days. So I think everyone's moving quite quickly now around this cyber security issue.
Yeah, okay. And you touched on dealer groups. So, obviously a lot of advisors that avail themselves of your services would be licensed through dealer groups. Do they have many inquiries of you guys? What's sort of the process? If an advisor's in a dealer group and they want to use your services, what sort of investigative process does the dealer group go through with you?
Well, if an advisor comes to us, first of all, we sort of ask, are we approved to be used by your licensee? If there is a process that we have to go through, we'll provide all that data to the licensee to make their assessments. But many licensees will also come over and do a visit, and visit the premises and how we operate as well. And we get probably a dozen of those a year.
Okay,
And we do encourage that as well.
Well, look, I'm sure there'd be a lot of advisors out there pleased to hear that that their dealer groups have taken that step to, to investigate and check things out. So that would provide, quite a bit of comfort. Um, in terms of regulatory issues, the QAR that was recently released, there was some really interesting stuff in that potentially around where statements of advice might be heading, records of advice. There could be, if all of it's implemented, potentially there's quite a few changes. Where do you guys sit on that? What do you think might happen? How would you pivot if there are dramatic changes? Where do you sit with all of that?
I think some of the changes will come through. I think there's a lot of agreement amongst most parties that some of these changes are just common sense. Around the statement of advice, I think there's starting to get more traction there. There might be some changes there, but I believe that might end up being kept on file rather than being given to the client. So, and how that looks, we're not really quite sure yet, but it'd be interesting to see how that winds out. If those changes do happen, probably at our end, we'll probably have to change some of our processes because maybe different licensees will have different thoughts around how that SOA looks if it just has to be kept on file. Yeah. Is it reduced? Yeah, we just don't know.
Yeah, okay, so it's a wait and see type
approach. It's a bit of a wait and see at the moment, yes.
And from a staffing perspective, obviously I can imagine one of the things that would be key for you, you go through this process of training staff, onboarding them, you're clearly going to want to keep them on board for as long as possible. In terms of minimising staff turnover, how do you, what's key to that? How do you go about it? You mentioned a few minutes ago that with COVID, you did lose a few key people. So what's the key to sort of keeping that group together and that skill set?
Well, I think the key is to obviously pay quite well, but also to provide growth opportunities within the organisation, because if you don't, they'll move elsewhere for that growth. From the outset, we actually implemented a loyalty program. So if you remain with Atlas for 3 years, you do get to share. We put a percentage of the profits back to the staff. So, for example, with one of the Filipino staff members, if they've been with us for 3 years, that bonus can probably entail to be 6 months' salary. Wow. So it's quite significant financially for them to hang around. And plus that knowledge that someone gets in 3 years is hard to build up. So we don't want to lose key staff members. So we really want to keep them on board. And that's just part of what we do as well.
Okay, that's great to hear. And obviously that'll go a long way towards keeping those people on board.
It does, yes.
Yeah. The environment out there, I think, X-Plan is still very key. I think most advisors are still using that as their predominant software. Do you have a range of software that you can work with? So if someone out there is using different software, do you have the ability to help them and provide advice for those types of clients? And typically, what's your turnaround time? So if a request comes in to put together a plan, assemble that, how quickly do you typically get that back out?
Yeah, good question. So software, we use the software that advisors want to use. All licensees are different. Some will stick with one software provider, while others will say, listen, there's a whole myriad of them. Choose which one you want, Mr. Advisor or Mrs. Advisor. So we're happy to use whatever systems there are. Okay. Also, with data receipt plus 5 days, 5 working days is our turnaround time, which is pretty sharp.
Yeah, that's very quick. And what's the interaction like? So if an advisor does, they receive that plan back within the 5 days, if there's alterations that need to be done to that, do they get in contact with the person that's worked on that file directly? How does that sort of work?
That's a really good point. So we operate a little bit differently. We have a statement of advice coordinator. So they will coordinate everything with the advisor and the paraplanner. So the paraplanner can focus on actually doing the plans while the coordinator can coordinate everything. Go backs come back all the time in respect to advisor might change their mind based on modelling. So can we make some alterations? That happens all the time. Okay, so just go back through the coordinator and the coordinator coordinates all that, the paraplanner.
For a lot of advisors out there, they would have typically either completed their own financial plans or have or had a paraplanner in-house. The thought processes that they go through in your experience, what is it that makes them decide to outsource paraplanning services or virtual assistant type services? Where are the key benefits and what are the decision-making processes that the advisor needs to weigh up?
Well, I think the advisors, especially on the paraplanning side, need to think, okay, well, if I'm doing 20 statements of advice a year, do I really need someone in-house to do those? It's a significant cost for the small amount of statements of advice they're doing. And we've probably seen at the moment statements of advice actually dropping off in the industry at the moment. So that's something to think about. Have they got the expertise? If they haven't got the expertise, offshore it as well. And the virtual assistant as well is that we offer the 20 hours or the 40-hour coverage per week. So with that in mind, an advisor can weigh up how much time they actually need an assistant to do work for them. So they've got those different opportunities and options with us.
Okay, last question for you before I let you go. For an advisor that is considering outsourcing some of these services, whether it be virtual assistant services or paraplanning, can you name just a couple of things that they should be on the lookout for to help them make that decision?
Sure. So really there's a number of things to look at, and we're organising a checklist for advisors shortly as well. Just ask things like, what insurance do they have in place? Speak to an advisor that's already used the service and they can give you some understanding of how they've gone through that whole process. We encourage also site visits so you can actually eyeball and see where they're working from. They're three things that should be considered, and also make sure that the licensee is comfortable with the provider you're going to use as well.
Well, very salient points and I think very useful for advisors out there. Jason, thank you for joining me today. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.